What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new Crossed Up, the first episode of the 2023 season. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel, and we are back after one of the shortest off seasons that I can ever remember. I feel like you and I were just sitting out in left field in that auxiliary press box during the World Series. And here we are, and it's pitchers and catchers, and we're back. And I don't know if it's the Eagles, I don't know if it was the deep Phillies playoff run or what, but I just can't believe we're doing this already.
Well, Bob, to be honest with you, I mean, really, it's only 104 days since they lost the World Series. That's all it is. It's 104 days. Like the Eagles losing the Super Bowl, and they won't play another competitive game for 8 months.
Yeah.
And we're 104 days later, and we're in spring training.
Yeah,
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's great. It's great. I mean, really,
we have baseball, and it's not live action yet. It's not for real, but we have signs of life here. Pitchers and catchers down in Clearwater today, actually, as we record this, and this will go out on Friday, which I guess should bring us to a programming note here. So in the past, one of the things that our listeners, they always say, like, we really like your show. You have good chemistry. It's insightful. It's a little bit different. We enjoy it. But what the hell, guys? Like, sometimes you'll miss a week or you'll go away for 2 weeks. So here's the deal. We took a really long and hard look at this show with a couple conversations over the past few weeks, and we kicked around a bunch of different options. And we decided that we're going to continue as is. We're going to stay with Crossed Up. But for the first time since the show's inception, we're going to keep a schedule. And it's not just, hey, do you want to record, and trying to sync up schedules. So what we are going to do this season is we will give a show every Monday and every Friday. And so this one went out on Friday. It's episode 1 of this season, and we will stick to that schedule unless I happen to have a child on one of those 2 days. Because it segues into the other aspect that I want to touch on ahead of time here. Anthony, you obviously were doing some coverage during the stretch drive of the regular season and in the postseason with the Phillies, and kind of supplemented what I was doing at the start of the season. This year, though, we're going to kind of reverse roles. So you're going to be taking the lead on Phillies coverage for Crossing Broad. I have some other obligations professionally that I need to tend to within the company. And, to be perfectly honest, I have a 17-month-old daughter, and I am expecting my first son on April 1st, which is not the perfect time to have a child as it relates to covering a Major League Baseball team. So
you know what's coming opening day. You know what's going to happen
absolutely.
Opening day, no matter what.
Absolutely. So Anthony's going to kind of be taking the lead role in Phillies coverage for Crossing Broad. I still hope to be down there with some frequency at least, and providing some kind of alternative coverage, maybe kind of getting back to my roots as a little bit of an unhinged fan blogger type rather than the big journalist.
Right?
Yeah. So I think that's going to be our plan for the season. And then one other thing that I had kind of kicked around was starting a separate podcast where it's 20 minutes every day, one person kind of recapping, walking through each night, each game. And rather than kind of section off its own show, we're actually going to run that through the Crossed Up channel as well. So our big podcasts are going to be on Monday and Friday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every day.
If there's a game.
If there's a game,
right?
Either Anthony or myself is going to jump on and kind of just, tell you what we saw. What did we see down at the ballpark? What are we hearing? What stuck out to us each and every game. And we know that there's other podcasts that do this, that do daily stuff, but I think it was a really nice way for us to stay in a rhythm and be here and chronicle this whole thing from start to finish. Because let's be honest, you and I have had playoff expectations in the past, but this year's different. They climbed that mountain last year, and I think that everybody really expects to see one hell of a season here. So it should be a lot of fun. There should be plenty to talk about. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, so am I, Bob. And not only that, I mean, and we saw, I mean, it's no secret. The run last year, October and November, the traffic on Crossing Broad site was astronomical. I mean, it was some of the biggest numbers the site has ever put up. And that was totally, I mean, obviously, the Eagles getting off to a great start helped too. I mean, I don't want to just make it that it's 100% Phillies, but it was predominantly, the Phillies making the run that they made,
Absolutely.
right? And so obviously there's a feeling in this city that we are going to kind of be in that feeling of what it was like back in the 07 to 11, right? Where that kind of excitement for the team is there. The crowds are going to be there. I don't know if they're going to sell out every night, but they're going to get big crowds in that building now. It's not going to be just, show me.
You're not going to have people saying, I need to see more or prove that you're legit, or you beat up on the bad teams. But what happens when you play the Mets? I mean, it's different now. I think that this fan base and this team together has turned a corner.
Yeah. And so because of that, we recognize that. And so therefore we want to be able to provide that outlet for fans to talk about the Phillies, or listen to about the Phillies, or reach out to us on Twitter and let us know what they think. Watch us. We're going to be putting these up on YouTube. Like, everything's there. It's going to be a much more engaged podcast for everybody. And I'm excited for the season. I'm looking forward to it. Going to be down at spring training. I'll be there for about 9 days worth of their camp in March. So it'll be really kind of cool to just kind of get some stuff from while we're down there as well. Maybe we'll get a guest or two while we're at it. Have some fun with that as well. So no, I do. I'm really kind of looking forward to the season and where we're headed with this.
Yeah, and as always, I mean, obviously you've done a great job with the Flyers. Your stuff with the Phillies at the end of last season was great, and so I think the fans are going to really enjoy following you and following the website here throughout the season. So here we are. This is our show. I'd like to say it's a new show. But it's certainly a revamped show. I think it's a rededicated show with some focus. And listen, I mean, we're here. We're here. It's legit. We're sticking around. We like you said, we had some thoughts about maybe kind of killing it off, rethinking what we were going to do, but we want this show to succeed. We want it to be bigger and better than ever. And I think that this is the year that's going to happen. So
I agree.
Make sure that you're following along, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, YouTube. And then we also just started up a Twitter account today for the show as well. It's at Up Phillies, UP, Up for crossed up, and Phillies. And you can follow us along on the Twitter account, and then certainly our personal accounts. If you're watching on YouTube, you see them on the screen there. If you're not and you're listening, I'm Bob Wankel, at Bob Wankel CB. And then, of course, Anthony is at Ant San Philly. All right. Good to see you're not Ant San Francisco anymore. So
that was such a great nickname by
beautiful.
That was such a great nickname.
So here we are, and it's funny, like, pitchers and catchers, baseball is back, and I'm gonna hit you with one right off the bat here. Mm-hmm. And you may know this about me because this isn't the first season that we've talked baseball, but I have to tell you, I find pitchers and catchers to be one of the most overrated days on the sports calendar. It's like a rite of spring. It's an event that you look forward to because you know what's coming, you know what's ahead. But for me, I don't know, a bunch of guys just throw into it's not really that big of a deal for me.
I look at it as it's the baseball fans' Groundhog Day.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's
right. That's exactly. It's 6 more weeks and then the season starts. That's really what it is. I don't get excited by the actual events of pitchers and catchers because you watch the video. It's like, ooh, they're throwing.
Yeah, they threw. I have no idea what I'm looking at here, but he threw the ball. The catcher caught the ball. There's a coach standing in the box, just taking like dry swings, like no bat in hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that one of the issues is that usually if there's news coming out of camp, it's either good news, like we saw today. There can be good news, Sir Anthony Dominguez extension, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But most of the time, it's we're going to slow this guy down, or we're going to hold him back, or he felt a little stiff. So there's like not a ton of good that can come at this point in spring training, at least before they start playing the game.
No, but I do always look forward to, and I was watching it just before we started recording here. I do always look forward to that first press conference, like where you're talking to the manager, and Rob Thompson talked today. And he talked to, we'll talk about some of the things that he said. But the one thing is like, you mentioned that, like, it's usually you're getting, so-and-so is a little bit behind. They didn't really have anybody. There's one non-roster invite player who's got a very, very minor hamstring injury pitcher. John Duplantier used to be within the Diamondbacks organization. But they're continuing his throwing program, so it's not going to affect him as far as pitching is concerned. And Soto has got a visa issue right now, but the good news is he lives like right by the Phillies Dominican camp. So they're just basically making him start his program there. He won't be behind when he actually gets to Florida. So that's it. I mean, everybody else, Bryce Harper aside, is healthy, coming into spring training. So knock on wood, that's great news for the Phillies. Normally, like you said, there's a handful of guys. Remember last year we had Zach Wheeler right off the bat, right? That was a problem. So day one, no concerns. Let's see what day two brings.
So this year is a lot different than previous years in that there's not a ton of, or at least there's not seemingly a ton of competition to be had here.
No.
This roster is veteran. It's pretty established. There may be a bench spot or two available. And then, who is that last arm in the bullpen? I mean, those are really the roster battles that we're going to see play out.
And the number five starter.
And the number 5 starter. Yeah. And I think that, and we'll talk about that in great detail here. I think that is probably the prominent, the first and foremost thing that has to get figured out for this team this spring. And I think it's probably the primary storyline and the thing that everyone's going to pay attention to. So it's kind of interesting. We're not looking at 7 or 8 different roster battles. We don't have the who's going to win center field. We know what this team wants to come to opening day with. So that being said, 5th starter aside, Andrew Painter aside, what is it really that you're looking at in totality when you kind of just say, here's spring training. What do I need to see? What do I not want to see? Like, what are we looking for here?
So I think that the bullpen is really interesting. And I know that I feel like I talk about the bullpen every spring, right? And in years past, I've been concerned about the bullpen every spring. It's been my big red flag. I don't think it's a red flag anymore. I think it's a pretty solid bullpen. But what I'm curious to see, and we may not know, Bob, until the actual regular season begins, but you start those last week and a half of spring training, you really start to get a sense of roles that they kind of fit. And I don't think that there's going to be a set closer per se, but I do think that there are going to be guys that are put into certain situations. And I think a guy like Sir Anthony Dominguez, who did sign an extension today, I think he's going to be your high leverage right-handed reliever. And whether that means he comes in the 7th or the 8th or the 9th, will really depend on the matchup, the score of the game, et cetera, et cetera. I think he is probably the guy that they view as the best reliever that's there. That's not a knock on anybody else in the pen. I just think that that's what the Phillies believe. And I think that he's going to be the guy that's given the most crucial moments to start the season. But beyond that, it's going to be interesting to see. You got 3 lefties in that bullpen. Phillies never have 3 lefties in the pen, so they can match up with anybody, and it's a matter of when and who at that time. And then you have a couple other guys who are righties who have closer experience, like a Kimbrel and like a Soto. I mean, so I'm really excited to see how the bullpen shapes out, because they have 5 or 6 guys that could all fit multiple roles, and who gets to be what role is what's most interesting to me.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of versatility there. And I mean, we're coming into a spring training in which there are 4 guys in the back end of that bullpen that all have significant 9th inning experience or high leverage experience. And to your point, we may not know until the regular season. It may take a while into the month of April for these roles to be a little bit more established, because let's be honest, 8 Phillies, and you and I talked about this last night, 8 Phillies are going to participate in the World Baseball Classic. So between March 8th, which is when it starts up, and March 21st, and I imagine there's a day or two that kind of bookends the WBC as well, you're talking about 2+ weeks where a lot of prominent pieces of this team, this roster, aren't going to be in Clearwater. So I think that is going to kind of create a little bit of a disjointed feel to their camp. But again, you're talking about a veteran team that has clearly defined roles, that kind of knows what to expect. And I don't expect this to kind of disrupt the Phillies' rhythm as they build towards the season, even though they have a significant number. It's a third of the roster. So That being said, I do think it may take them a little bit of time to sort of get everything together here.
Yeah, the one thing I like about the fact that they have so many guys playing in the World Baseball Classic is that matters to these guys. Like, that's a thing. I mean, that's like the Olympic gold medal, right? I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, there are players going this year that did not previously go who are like amped up about it.
Right. And so this is going to be competitive baseball in March. And so, especially for, I look at the hitters, and I look at, Schwarber and Turner and Real Muto all playing for Team USA. And I think that that's a great thing. Like, they're going to get competitive at-bats, and several of them over the course of 2 weeks in March, when they may play 7 innings, 8 innings or a complete game, because they matter, as opposed to just getting, either 1 and 2 at-bats and then head to the locker room and go to the golf course, right? I mean, so like, they're going to be in, I hope, regular season ready, maybe a little bit sooner than usual. And that's a good thing. Pitchers, maybe not so much, but I think that the hitters, it'll be good for them.
So the main thing that you led with here that you want to see is how the back end of this bullpen shakes out. Everyone wants to see how the 5th starter spot shakes out, and we'll get to that in a minute. One thing that I really am interested, well, there's 2. I mean, I always have to have 2. I can't just answer my own questions succinctly, but the one thing I'm very curious to see with the back end of that bullpen is Jose Alvarado. You and I talked so much about him last year and how impressive it was for, I think, not only to just find his stuff, but to find a comfort zone, to find the confidence in his stuff that he previously lacked. And this was a guy that we thought was on the verge of being run out of town. I mean, you and I on this show, we could go back and pull that up. We say some smart things from time to time, but we were both kind of like, see you later, man.
Yeah, we were done with him.
And I mean, this guy completely resurrected his career in this city. And I know it ended in just a catastrophic fashion. Maybe I'm getting softer at my old age, but I just don't really put that on him. I felt like it was a guy that was sort of cooked at the very end, who really turned a corner and helped that team get to a spot they would have never been to had he not done what he did. And right. I think I view him with a little bit more of forgiveness than maybe some fans will coming into the season. But what I want to see is now, how does he respond to that? Can he maintain what he found really in the second half of last season into the beginning of the postseason? Or are we going to take 2 steps back here and he be all over the place again?
What if I said this to you, Bob? This is really an interesting thing when I looked at this bullpen. Now, let's just assume that the top 7 guys in the bullpen, Dominguez, Alvarado, Kimbrel, Soto, and then probably Bilotti, Brogdon, and Matt Strahm, right?
Yes.
And then there's going to be one more. It's going to be a long guy, whether it's Nick Nelson, Bailey Falter, Christopher Sanchez, whoever, right? But like the top 7, the real bullpen. If I told you that Alvarado is the youngest guy in that pen, does that surprise you?
Yeah, it is surprising to hear that. I mean, I think part of it is because he's one of the longest tenure guys in the back of that bullpen. Or I should say in the bullpen period. But I also think that it feels like it's been a lot longer than it has been here.
I was surprised when I looked it up. I was surprised that he's still only 27.
Yeah. Now it has been a long, strange trip with Jose Alvarado.
He does turn 28 during the season, but he's still only 27. So when you think about that and you think he's entering what is considered a pitcher's prime, right? Late 20s, early 30s is considered the pitcher's prime. Yeah, like I think that there's a reason to be excited that he figured something out last year. Now, of course, you're right. It could go, relievers are so fickle, right? It could go just as easily go bad as it went good for him, right? So we got to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. But I think that there's something there. I think that they figured something out. I think he learned how to pitch. He's pitching backwards, not relying so much on the fastball, kind of making that like more of a second pitch or a 1A, I should say. And I think that approach is what really changed it for him. And if he keeps going in that direction, I think he's going to be fine.
I agree. I mean, certainly there was a tweak to how he mixed pitches. And I know it's about the stuff with him at the end of the day, but I do wonder about the resilience. He showed a ton of it last year. Can he show it again? I don't think there's any reason to believe he won't, but it is something that when I look at the bullpen and I go, okay, if they get the bounce back from Kimbrel, which I think that there's enough of a track record there, and the stuff and the velocity was still good enough. Some of the metrics still are good enough where I think that there's still a very good pitcher there. I certainly have a ton of belief in Sir Anthony Dominguez. I have a lot of belief in Soto. Alvarado is the one guy that I'm like, I just need to see you that first week of the season to just know, like I am holding my breath and optimistically so right now, but that's one thing I'll be keeping an eye on through the WBC, through spring training. The other thing is, I don't think that there's anything that can be answered for me this spring. I won't bat an eye if someone hits 400. I won't if someone hits a $130. I won't. I've seen the Don Brown thing, going back 10 years ago. I saw Ryan Howard at the end when he was cooked, kind of fool us during the spring with big spring trainings, the Scott Kingerys of the world. Like we've been down this road. We all know that performance in spring training simply doesn't matter.
Hey, he's still there, by the way.
I know. But there is one thing I want to see from one Phillies hitter this spring.
Yeah.
I need to see Nick Castellanos drive the baseball. I don't need him to hit 300. I don't need him to hit 8 home runs. I just need to see the guy swing the bat with authority. And I go back to last year, 13 home runs. He hit 5 home runs the last 40 regular season games. He didn't hit a home run in 17 postseason games. And you know what's amazing about it? You and I want to say it was the Braves series. It might have been that first Braves game in the NLDS, or it might have been the first Padres game at home. It might have been game 3 of the Padres series. We watched Nick Castellanos take batting practice and just launch balls into the second.
Yep. It's what it was.
And I looked at you and I'm like, I know it's BP, dude, but like, what are we doing here? Like if you can hit a ball with that type of authority during BP, like you would think there's at least enough pop where you wouldn't go 17 games in October without happening to run into one, So I guess I want to know what we're getting there. I feel like that there was the adjustment phase with him last season, different city, late start to the spring. Everyone was sort of trying to catch up. I know there's rumors about a potential wrist injury with him. Everyone kind of goes back to that awkwardness and saying like that might have sapped his power. He had a child last season. There's so many different things, right? Like this is a guy that has a long running track record of being able to hit gaps, hit 20, 25 home runs. Like that player has to still be there, right? Because if he's not, oh boy.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you on that. And it's interesting. Like I look at his first season in each place he's been. And it's been a struggle. Now, Detroit, it's obviously he came up as a rookie, right? So it was really his second season in Detroit that was the one where he wasn't great. But then the third season is when he started to get the OPS over 800, and he became a really good player. And then he gets traded to Chicago, and even that was in season, right? So that one you don't really look at. But you look at Cincinnati, and you look at his first season in Cincinnati, and he hit 225 and 298. He did get 14 home runs in a shortened season, but he really didn't look great while he was there. But he bounces back the next season as an all-star. He gets MVP votes, right? Hitting 309, right, with 34 home runs. And so all of a sudden it's like, okay. And now you come to Philly and it's like, okay, he took that step back. Again, adjustment. I believe that he'll have that bounce back season. Now, I think you're right. It's something that you really want to see in spring training. You want to see him making good, hard, solid contact repeatedly, and not just against minor league pitchers. You want to see it against guys who are going to be pitching for big clubs when you get into the regular season. So I do think that that's something to look out for, but I do think it's there.
Yeah.
If it means anything. I mean, I do.
It's not about numbers. I don't need to see an average. I don't need to see 7 home runs. I just need to see the ball driven with authority. And hey, low and away, off speed, maybe a little adjustment. Like I just want to see some progress. I want to see an adjustment is what I want to see. And it's interesting. I know the fans at times last season were frustrated with him, But
Mhm.
I also think that making the World Series cures a lot of those frustrations. And I feel like that given the expectations, given the contract, given what he actually did, I feel like that everyone kind of closed down 2022 all good with Nick Castellanos. And, he made some huge defensive plays, something that you brought him in for, to make those clutch defensive plays in postseason games. But I just think that, I think that the fans are coming into this season with this feeling of like, we're willing to let this play out. I mean, they have no choice, but I don't think that they're coming into the season saying this guy's a bust. He's never going to figure it out. I think there's some optimism that he's going to get comfortable and kind of become the player that everyone expects him to be. So that's the thing that I sort of have my eye on coming into this spring training. So one thing that we've done the past 5 or 6 years, and in part because the Phillies didn't have a lot of depth, and then you go back a couple years before that, and in part because they just weren't very good. This team doesn't have a lot of roster battles. Like, we don't have 3 spots in the everyday lineup up for grabs here. The starting lineup in terms of who's going to take the field is set. Like, we know what the Phillies want to come to opening day with. There's no mystery here at all. So there is no starting spot up for grabs unless there's an injury. And we know that 7 of those 8 bullpen spots are pretty much locked in. 4 of the spots in the rotation are locked in. So my question to you is, what are the battles that we're looking at here? I mean, Edmundo Sosa, Harrison, these guys are on the team, right? Like Dalton Guthrie, he's on the team, right?
Well, I think once they traded both Vierling and Maton, that locks in Dalton Guthrie.
Right.
I think that gets him on the team. And they really don't have, Jake Cave is like the veteran guy that they brought in who's on the 40-man, who maybe could push for that in spring training if Guthrie doesn't look great. I mean, I think that's like the backup plan. But the beautiful thing is Harrison can play the corners in the outfield if need be. So there's that too. So as far as the lineup is concerned, I don't think that there's really a bench. I don't think that there's much of a battle at all. When they signed Josh Harrison, I think that pretty much put Cody Clemens into the minors. And he stays on the 40-man, but I don't think he starts the year with the team. I do believe he has, I'm going to look real quick. I do believe he has an option left. Yeah, he does. So Cody is 2. So Cody Clemens can get sent down. Harrison cannot, and Sosa cannot, right? So that's why I think that those guys are going to get the bench spots. Stubbs, it'll be Stubbs, Sosa, Harrison, and Guthrie. I guess what's interesting is to see until Harper comes back.
I have Derek Hall on this roster. And
no, he's going to be, and I think he's going to play against righties. I mean, no question, he's the DH against right-handers. But if you face a lefty, then what happens? Like, does Harrison go in and play a position and somebody else becomes the DH? Or do you just make Harrison the DH? Like, what do you do against a left-handed pitcher? I mean, you're obviously not taking Schwarber out of the lineup.
Right.
And it looks like Marsh is going to be your everyday center fielder. Your Stott's going to play second. So you're not taking your lefties really out of the lineup unless it's just give them a blow. There's no real platoon. The only platoon slot in the lineup to me is that quote-unquote DH slot against left-handed pitching. So that's the only other thing I think that needs to be resolved as far as the lineup's concerned.
So before we move on from that, we talk about things being solidified. There are some things that need to be answered, though. I don't think that you could be more impressed than we were with Bryson Stott and maturity and the clutch factor and the game not being too big for him, the moment not being too big for him. But, they face a lefty. Are we absolutely certain that Bryson Stott is going to take the bulk of these at-bats? Are we certain that center field? Are we absolutely certain that that's what we're doing? And I know that there's this idea that you have to give these guys the first look. You have to give them every opportunity to prove they can't do it. And I'm comfortable with that. But if they can't, then that depth and then how you construct that bench really comes into play. Do we see a lot more of Harrison? Do we see a lot more of Sosa? What does play out here?
Yeah, no, and that's a fair question. And I do think that those guys are going to get starts in those situations, right? I do think you're going to see opportunities for Sosa and Guthrie and Harrison to play especially against left-handed pitching. it just makes sense. I just don't think it's a true platoon. In other words, like I think Stott and Marsh are going to, at least those two guys, are going to be guys who play more regularly against lefties. It's not going to be a straight platoon. But you're right. If they come out and can't hit lefties and are really struggling against lefties, then maybe it eventually becomes a platoon where Dalton Guthrie is playing center field against left-handers and Edmundo Sosa is playing instead of Bryson Stott. So yeah, I mean that's certainly a possibility, but I don't think that that's something that's going to be considered, platooning. You're going to figure that out through spring training. I think they're going to be given that opportunity to play into the regular season, and then if by like sometime in May, it's not working, I think that's when you might start to see some changes.
So the other thing that I'm interested in, and you and I always talk about culture, talk about mindset, where a team is at as they go through a season. And I know that there's been some talk about, will this team be complacent? Will they kind of just rest on the fact that, hey, we did it last year, so we know we can do it, and it's all good? Or are they going to come out with a lot of urgency, with the hair on fire, so to speak? And so I kind of look at it and say there's no chance of this team being complacent. And I say that, one, because I know some of the players and I know some of the personalities in that locker room, and I just frankly don't think that that's how these guys are constructed. I don't think a Kyle Schwarber is a complacent kind of guy. I don't think JT Realmuto is a complacent kind of guy. I think that they have the right leadership dynamics in that clubhouse to kind of make sure that doesn't happen. But then I think that there's also a part of this in Philadelphia. One of the things I was saying during the Eagles run up to the Super Bowl was that Philadelphia doesn't really know how to be good. They don't know how to be the team that's supposed to win. It's always got to be born out of disrespect. Well, this analyst said this about us. This guy said this about us. We're the underdog. And it was, for me, I looked at it and I was wrong. I couldn't have been more wrong because they didn't win the game. But I came into the Super Bowl saying, like, the Eagles are the better team. They should win this game. And I even felt weird doing that because my life, it's what the World Series was last year. Wow, this Phillies team is really good, and I have a lot of respect for what they've done, but they're going up against a much better opponent. And if everything breaks right, maybe they can win, but they probably won't. With the Eagles, I was like, they should win this game. So with the Phillies, though, you say, hey, we're the defending National League champs. We have a high payroll, star-studded clubhouse, talent everywhere. But then you look at the odds, and you see that the Braves and the Mets are just miles and miles ahead. You see that the Mets are plus 130 to win the division. You see the Braves are plus 140. You see the Phillies are plus 370. 88.5 wins on the over-under. They have the 8th best odds to win the World Series and the 6th best odds to win the World Series out of the National League. This team plays right into what every Philadelphia fan loves. They're all overlooking us again. I just think that that's going to resonate in the clubhouse. I just don't think there's any way that this team comes out and says, we did it last year. We're good.
I agree. And it's funny that you said that, Bob, but I wish we had talked about that. I actually started and I never finished it. And maybe I will, but I started writing a story where I was looking at Philadelphia sports historically and how there's only been 3 instances in the history of Philadelphia sports where we have been a front runner of some sort and come through all the way to the end. Okay. And in all honesty, only one of the 3 was like start to finish. And that was your 82-83 Sixers, who were easily the best team in basketball that year. And then, Moses Malone, and they only lost 1 game in the playoffs instead of sweeping everybody. But still, I mean, that's how dominant they were. But the other 2 was the second Stanley Cup for the Flyers, although it took until they got to the final before we went, okay, yeah, this is a legit team, right, because they thought that no way an expansion team was going to win back-to-back. And until they got there and played another expansion team, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, the Flyers are pretty good. And the other one was the Phillies in 2008, not until they beat the Dodgers, though. I mean, you got to remember, people forget that they were behind and they had to run down the Mets, at the end of the regular season. And then there's no way they're going to beat the Dodgers because they don't have the pitching, and then they beat the Dodgers, right? So so like the Phillies kind of needed to kind of get rolling in that year. And then of course you get the break of Boston losing to Tampa, the defending champ gets knocked out. Okay, this is a good matchup for the Phillies. The Phillies are going to win the World Series. At that point, you can be confident. Those were the only 3 times in the history of Philadelphia that we've ever done well from ahead. And every other time when we've gotten overconfident, we've been let down.
Yeah, and I said it's not even a criticism of the fans. It's just I don't know how to do this. I mean, as a 37-year-old, you've just spanned. I mean, I wasn't alive for the 82-83 Sixers. The first team that I saw reach the big stage was that 93 Phillies team. They had no business being there. Right. I suppose that the 97 Flyers, I actually was told they were favored in that series.
They were favored in the series, but they weren't favored to get there. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, I mean, that was just a team that it was weird. I mean, a lot of people thought the way it was going in that playoffs, okay, they just beat the Rangers and they beat every, who they beat. And it's like, okay, this is a team of destiny. Right. They're going to win. And Detroit this was the beginning of the dynasty. Nobody knew Detroit was going to be that good. And then Detroit went and spanked them and swept them. So yeah, right. they were favored. The Flyers were favored there. But I mean, like, look at the Eagles in 2004, right? I mean, that, and even the 2 years before that, when they were home, lost to the NFC Championship games at home, favored, right? I mean, it was just, the Sixers in recent years, like, I mean, looking at, this is a team that should go to the NBA final, and they get bounced in the second round by Atlanta. I mean, that's the kind of thing. I mean, every time. And I don't want to distract from what your point is about this Phillies team, but I mean, we don't in Philadelphia. We don't know how to be good up front. It's better when we come from behind.
I really think that that's going to amp up this fan base a little bit because, listen, the whole thing last year was show me. And I'm not telling you that every day or every game is going to be a sellout. It's not. You're going to have cold days in April. Kids are in school, all the normal stuff. But I do think that if this team is playing good ball and good things are happening down at Citizens Bank Park, we might not be looking at 18,000 people in the middle of July and people calling talk radio and saying, I need to see more. This team hasn't won forever. Like, I think that we got the bought in, and I think that people realize that, hey, this group of guys can do it, even if it's not pacing 105 wins. And I think that they've earned a little bit of trust from this fan base, and people that were reluctant to pay and roll through the gates, I think are going to do it. And I think that not only are they good, but the fact that, again, odds makers, Major League Baseball, kind of enamored with the Braves about being this elite, unbelievable franchise, coming off a 100-plus win season. They're going to be great again. Everybody loving what the Mets have done and all the money that's been spent. And that rotation, Phillies are kind of getting overlooked. And when you have a good team and one that's being overlooked a little bit that kind of plays into that Philadelphia, hey, nobody's giving us respect card, man, it could make for really, really interesting fan dynamics if this team does get off to a pretty good start.
Yeah, and you know what, Bob? I'll tell you. And I'll give you a historical comparison. And I'm not saying that this is what this team is, because it's not. This team is a lot better than what I'm about to compare it to. But coming off of that 93 year, because remember, that was a surprise. Like, that team, the Phillies in 92 were one of the worst teams in baseball. They were worst to first to get to 93. And it was kind of they got off to such a great start that the fans kind of got on board quick with that team, right? But at the same time, is
this going to be a real team that you reference?
Or no, what I'm saying to you is that the following season, so you come off of that great run, and 94 rolls around, and I know that that's a strike year, and you can't, right? But if you start looking at their attendance for home games, they were getting, I'm looking at it right now. This is April night games at home. I'm going to skip opening day, right? But the first two were a little bit lower. They were 23 and 24. But then 32,000, 36,000, 43,000, 26, 35. I mean, that's a home, the first home
that's
stand,
pretty good. That's
right?
Pretty
I mean, and that's at the Vet. That's not at Citizens Bank. So, I mean, yes, it's not 64,000, which the Vet could hold. But people, this city, it's ingrained in us. If you believe in the team, you're going to show up and support them.
I think it's worth pointing out that if you are between the ages of 18 and 28, this is the first time since that you were 8 and 18, like you were either in elementary school or you're just finishing up high school since the Phillies were good. Like that younger demographic of people, the college age kid, the young professional, like those people haven't seen this in so long. Their lives have completely changed. Like where they're at in their growth process is totally different now. And I really think that last year was this reminder of like, oh, and I said this, we talked about this last year. This can be really fun.
Yeah, and let me give you one more, but I'm just gonna. This is like fascinating. I'm glad I pulled this up to look at it. So later in the season, the first time the Braves came in. Now keep in mind the Braves are the team the Phillies beat in the NLCS in '93. Okay, so '94. This is the first year the Braves are in their division. Okay, that was the first, and obviously it didn't. They didn't have the playoffs, and so the Braves weren't really NL East champs until '95 when they won the World Series. But the first time they came in was in late June. Okay, the Phillies were under 500 and 11 games out when the Braves rolled into town for a weekend series in June. Under 500. Here's your attendance for the 3-game series: 47-5, 57-9, 52-5. For an sub 500 team in June, 11 games out of first. But it's the season after you went to the World Series.
Well, that might be a little bit of a different era, because as optimistic as I am about the fans being back in love with the Phillies, if the Phillies are 11 games out in June and they're under 500,
but it's a different era. Keep in mind that the wild card exists now, which it didn't. If you're a 500 team in June, you are still in the playoff race now.
It is going to be interesting because, one thing that kind of, I feel like got overlooked, like everyone's in love with Rob Thompson, everyone's in love with this team. But man, one thing that Philadelphia loves to do, you lose, you know whose fault it is, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It's the coach. Let Jonathan Gannon tell you about that. And I'm not saying that that's, wrong in this case, but, Rob Thompson got crushed. How do you take out Zach Wheeler? How do you go to Jose Alvarado? How do you, and so it kind of is like a little bit of a reminder that if things don't get off to a good start, like how much wiggle room does he have? How much goodwill has he built up? Probably a lot, I think. But I say that now. We'll see what happens 60, 70 games in if things aren't going well.
Yeah.
So, okay. That being said, I do think that this team is going to come in with the right mindset, and that was really the initial point here where we were going to be.
And I agree, yeah.
And I really do kind of believe that. So there are a few other things we want to talk about. We don't want to do an hour-and-a-half show tonight because, hey, March gets long. There's a lot to talk about when spring training starts up, and we're all excited. But about 2 weeks from now, we might need some content. So we're going to table some things for future shows. But let's talk a little bit about this fifth spot in the rotation. I have a thesis, and you can tell me that I'm wrong. I think that this is Painter's job to lose. I know he's 19. I know that's young for Major League Baseball. It's especially young for the Phillies. They've been so cautious with their prospects over the years, and it seems like their young talent gets to the big leagues at 24, 25 almost. I get all that. I know what history says. I listened to Dave Dombrowski talk during, one of his appearances this offseason, and, Painter comes up, the fifth spot in the rotation comes up, and he puts it right out there and says, like, hey, it's there. And to me, that signals that the Phillies are going to give this kid a legitimate shot, that this isn't like we don't really even want him to win it. We're going to be really cautious. I think once you say that, you've set this expectation that if he performs, he's going to win the job. I don't know how he's going to perform. I can't tell you that. But I think if he performs well enough, he's going to win it.
I tend to agree. The only thing that I will, and I think it's his job for the predominance of the season, the only thing I will say that maybe he doesn't get the job straight out of spring training.
Because of innings.
Yeah, because they want to curb his innings and be careful. They want to manage it. I think that it could be a situation where it's like, hey, Bailey Falter will give us the first, 5 to 7 starts, and then we'll call up Andrew Painter to kind of come in, once it's a little bit warmer. We don't have to worry about him throwing, in a 40-degree blustery game, and have to pull him after 3 innings and burn the bullpen.
Let me give you this hypothetical. The Phillies are not the team to beat in this division. Can they win it? maybe. Like, we'll do predictions a few weeks from now and all of
Yeah.
that. But if Painter is as advertised immediately, and you just say this kid might be the best pitcher on the staff right now, I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves with what Zach Wheeler is, what Aaron Nola is as well. Let's just say that he has that type of spring. Are the Phillies in a position to not field the best rotation possible, given that this is not a team that's supposed to run away with this division? They don't have the luxury of comfort here.
No, that's a great question, Bob, and I think that you're pretty spot on with that. The only thing I will say is that I don't think that the Phillies are in a bad spot if you just wait 6 weeks to bring him in. Like, in other words, you're really comfortable with your top 4 guys, right? I mean, there's no question. Nola, Wheeler, Suarez, and Taijuan Walker. You're comfortable with them rolling out there every 5 days, right? Assuming health, that's a good rotation. So if your 5th guy is a guy like Falter or Sanchez or whatever, I mean, whoever, Michael Plasmeyer is another name that was brought up today by Rob Thompson, as a matter of fact.
I heard that, and I like him, and he's a great guy and might have a spot on this team at some point this season. Yeah. I got to tell you, I would be stunned if Michael Plasmeyer was the 5th starter out of spring training. But
yeah,
stranger things have happened, I guess.
No, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, when he mentions those names, it almost makes me think they're willing to kind of just piecemeal it for a little bit.
Right.
You're not looking at a lot of starts. You're looking at, starts here and there for 6 weeks just to manage his innings. So that way you're not shutting down Andrew Painter when the games matter more at the end of the year, but rather he's a little bit more fresh.
Would you toy with the notion or toy with the idea of shortening the bullpen a guy and going with the 6-man rotation for this very reason, and for the fact that you actually might have the depth to do it?
Yeah, that's a great, and Bob, I would not be opposed to that, especially if you feel like, the way that the calendar breaks out, that you get that, that extra day off here and there. And you say, okay, well, we could skip this guy, so he's available out of the pen for 10 days, right? I mean, so you could really kind of, we're going to go 6 men for a little bit, and then, but these 10 to 12 days, we are only going to go 5, so that guy can, the other guy can kind of flex back into the bullpen as a long man if needed. That I could see that.
I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think that they have an appetite for that from kind of what we understand to this point. But
right,
I don't know. I mean,
look, all I will say is this: Dombrowski has a very rich history of putting a 20-year-old pitcher into a rotation. He did it with Jeremy Bonderman, who didn't really pan out for the Tigers at age 20. He did it with Josh Beckett in Florida. He did it with Rick Porcello with the Tigers. Even Verlander, he was 22 when he was a rookie, but even still, I mean, he was really young. That was a 22-year-old ace for a team that went to the World Series, right? So, I mean, he has done it, man. And so I would not be stunned if Andrew Painter is on the roster. I just think that it's an era where you manage innings so much more now that it makes a little bit more sense to kind of let him breathe a little bit and then call him up when it's a little bit warmer and you can get the calendar working in your favor. But yeah, I there's no question he's going to make the 5th most starts. Assuming everybody's healthy, he will make the 5th most starts this year.
I just look at this team, the year that they came off of, the talent that they have. I know what stands in their way in both the Braves and the Mets, and I respect both of those teams. And hey, spoiler alert, I probably won't pick the Phillies to win the NL East, but this is a team that it's set up for success moving forward. They have some interesting prospects. You feel good about it. But when I look at the championship window, can this team win a championship? Could they do it in 24 or 25 or 26? Sure, maybe. I have no idea. But I look at 23 and say, there's got to be some real championship urgency here. You went to the World Series last year. This team is not particularly young. Aaron Nola, do they do a deal with him? They seem like they're saying like they want to. They seem to be motivated to do it, but he's an unrestricted free agent. Zach Wheeler's not getting any younger. Bryce Harper isn't getting any younger. JT Realmuto's not getting any younger. People thought that he was about to fall off a cliff at the start of last season, and certainly he rebounded. But like, to me, this is the prime. You know, this is the team. This to me is like a year. If I'm Dave Dombrowski, like we talk about his aggressiveness and, you know, putting a championship team on the field, like I got to imagine that front office is looking at one another and saying, like, we're trying to win a championship this year. This is about winning the World Series.
No, you're right. You're 100% right. So if he feels that Andrew Painter pitching on April the 4th against the Yankees, which I guess would be if we're looking at the calendar, would be the 5th game. I think that's what it is. If you feel like that is when you need to have him make his major league debut and it's going to give you the best chance of winning, then do it. And I have zero problem with that.
And this is a great conversation piece on February 16th. We could be, you know, here the first week of March saying, well, he has no command. He's clearly not ready. He's not the starter. Right. We'll see you in June, hopefully. I mean, maybe that's where we end up. But as a conversation piece at the start of spring training, when you have this elite level prospect, a guy that probably is their best pitching prospect since what? Cole Hamels?
Since Cole, yep.
Fair to say. And I almost feel like there's a little bit more upside attached to this kid right now, you know?
Yeah.
So, and not to say that he's going to have that type of career or that type of impact for this team, but just in terms of expectation, talent, what he did last season, I mean, this is the real deal here. You know, I just am very curious to see how they play it. And I think it'll signal quite a bit about the way they feel about this team and their intent, frankly.
Hey,
okay.
Real quick, just two things off of what you just talked about in your last two pieces of information you threw out there. One, you mentioned Cole Hamels signed a minor league contract with the San Diego Padres today.
Ring chasing. He's ring chasing.
Yeah. Do you think he gets in there? Do you think he gets an opportunity with that team? I do.
Know, how many times? Like, how many more like Cole Hamels comebacks? And I don't know.
I do.
I get why he's still in it, because I bet you if everything aligns, like there's a physical talent that can still play at that level. But what's the sustainability of it? I don't know. And if you're the Padres, like, sure, yeah, what the hell? Why not? It's an interesting piece. I get the deal, but if you're telling me, like, do I think that Cole Hamels is going to be a quasi-significant contributor to the San Diego Padres postseason push this year? I don't know.
I can see. I'll tell you where I can see him kind of fitting in. I could see him kind of fitting in a relief role.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Does he have the ability to bounce back? Like, even if it's every other day, like once every 3 days? Like, do we know that he has that left?
We'll see.
That's a different type of path that he's not typically accustomed to. So that'll be interesting.
Certain guys, you know, have been able to do it, and other guys have really struggled. But you got to think that they don't really have a fifth starter. They really don't have a fourth starter. I mean, really, if you look at that, for all the money that the Padres have spent, after Darvish, Musgrove, and Snell, you know who the next three guys that are going to be in their battle for their rotation? Michael Wacha, who they just signed.
Yeah.
Nick Martinez, who ended up being better out of the bullpen last year than starting. And Seth Lugo, who they signed away from the Mets, who's we've seen with New York, is better in the bullpen than he is as a starter. So what's the possibility? I mean, who else can they possibly go? You know, the Morahone kid, maybe. I mean, yeah, but he looked better again in the bullpen. And then they brought in like a bunch of veteran non-roster guys, including Hamels and Julio Teheran, or however you pronounce it. Teheran, whatever.
I think that was a thing like 4 years ago when we were talking about him.
I could never get his name right. But the second thing I wanted to say, the Mets, who mad respect for the Mets. Do you know who the youngest player in their projected 26-man roster is?
Pete Alonso.
That is correct.
Yeah.
At 28 years old would be the youngest. The only other players that are even under 30 are Lindor. Nimmo turns 30 before opening day. Nito is 29. Guillorme is 28. He's a bench guy. The pitching staff is the youngest pitcher is Kodai Senga at 30.
What could go wrong?
And then the bullpen, Edwin Diaz, 29. Like, it's crazy how old they are. They're like the 83 Phillies.
Yeah. Well, two things on that real quick. Number one, get ready for the Edwin Diaz regression year.
I agree.
And number two, I'll see you in October, New York. They'll get there. There's too much talent to not get there, but I'm not doing this again. You know, they had me last year, and you looked at me and you're like, you're a sucker. I'm like, no, man, because you remember, it wasn't just that they were winning games. They were winning games like with magic too. Yeah. They were good. They were beating the hell out of teams, but then when they weren't, they'd be coming back. They'd have all these improbable, crazy wins. The bullpen was locking everything down, and I'm like, man, this is actually different this year. Lo and behold, it wasn't different. I'm just not doing it. I don't, how many times did the Phillies play the Mets this season with the new schedule?
12, I think it's 12, right?
Okay. Mets go, 8-4 against the Phillies. Okay, great. I don't care. Show me in October. I can't do it.
Well, I know we're not doing predictions tonight, but you know what? I'll tell you this. If you've listened to this podcast before, then you know that I'll say this. My take on the Mets is no different this year than it's been in any of the other years that we've done this podcast.
They're still the Mets.
They're still the Mets.
They're going to get all this publicity. They're going to get all the hype. Like the Cowboys. They become the Cowboys.
That's what they are. 1,000%.
There you go. We align there.
Yes. By the way, I hear, unless you had something else, I hear that you're taking my job here and doing one last thing.
I am. And you know what? I wanted to talk about the rule changes, but let's.
Oh, yeah. Darn, we didn't even get to the rules.
You want to say that
for Monday?
Yeah, we'll hold that. I have some rule changes thoughts. So we'll hold that.
Yeah, let's save it for Monday.
Let's go to one last thing here. I am going to take your job. So Corbin Burns, 2021 Cy Young winner, right? Had a good year in 2022. Goes to arbitration this year with Milwaukee. They can't agree to terms, so they go all the way. And I believe that he wanted 10.75. And Milwaukee came in at 10.01. And no, with arbitration, there's no middle ground. You present your case, one side wins. Milwaukee wins. Great job. Good job, Brewers. You went in, you made your case, and in the process, you created some hurt feelings with one of the best pitchers in baseball. He was interviewed today when he reported and basically said, it's kind of crazy. It shows you where an organization values you. It shows you what the organization truly thinks about you. And I get that it's a business, and I'm paraphrasing him here, but, I get that it's a business, but you hear some of the things that they use against you. And he had said one of the things they used against him was that he was one of the reasons they didn't make the postseason last year. And if you remember, the Phillies made it over the Brewers by a game. So, they used that against me. They actually won his final two starts. And he had a little bit of a hiccup against the Mets in like mid to late September. And then he lost another start against the Cardinals, in which he wasn't really bad either. But they kind of built this case against him. And he comes out of it and says, yeah, like, I'm not thrilled. Like, I'm a professional. I'm going to do my job. But, what the hell, man? And this is a guy that, like I said, he's one of the best pitchers in the game. And so I guess the question that I have for you, because there's two schools of thought here. One is it really worth it? And I know that Milwaukee's not a big market team, but is it really worth it to haggle over $750,000 for this elite level talent when you know what the ramifications are going to be in terms of morale? Or do you look at it and say, like, hey, yeah, Corbin, you know what? That sucks, but blame your players union that negotiated that process and agreed to it.
So you make it you give me two very good options there, because I think both are the case. Like, I mean, if you really want to look at it, yeah, it's the players union. This is what they agreed to, and the team has the right to do this and kind of put it into a perspective. And I've never been a big fan of players whining about money. I mean, he's getting paid $10 million this year. How long will it take us to earn $10 million, Bob? Right? Combined. Like, it's
maybe if I'm in Home Depot and a beam hits me on the head or something,
Right. So I mean, I don't have that much sympathy in that regard, but I do agree that if he's your best player, and look, the guy won the Cy Young in 21, right? and he's one of the best pitchers in the game. The optics of taking him to arbitration and then using like negative statistics in front of him against him to say why you shouldn't pay him that extra $750,000, that's irreparable harm that you're causing your own team. It's going to cost you more than $750,000 in the long run. To me, you suck that up and you pay it. So what you offered there, both the things that you said are true. And this is how I'll counter that. And you said we would bring up Sir Anthony Dominguez, and I'm going to bring it up right here. He signed his extension with the Phillies today. 2-year extension with an option, right? That's
club option for the 3rd year.
Yeah, club option for the 3rd year. His reaction to that was like emotional and unbelievable. He talked about how important it was to him and his family to get a contract, that they're now set for life.
Yeah.
And he said he doesn't want to be anywhere else the rest of his career. He wants to play here in Philadelphia because this is the only other family he knows. And the Phillies have gone out over the last several years and gotten all these players signed. They've gotten their arbitration cases settled since Dombrowski's come in. And they're getting a reputation of being really good to players, right? I mean, they're not overpaying out the wazoo either. They're just saying, okay, we can meet you closer to the number that you want. We'll find a way to make it work for both sides. And the players want to be here. And that vibe, that good juju is legit. It's a thing in baseball. When you are playing night after night after night, those are the things that keep you motivated to play and be at your best that often. And so when the Phillies do that,
too. It's a little bit different in the NFL. Like, say you're on a 1-year deal and you say, okay, like, I'm not happy here, but I got to play for me. I got to play for my next contract.
Right.
You're going through the arbitration process. You know, you're not always a free agent. You're not always at the end of that. You know,
right.
you might have that another year. You might have 2 more years. You might have 3 more, you know. So there's not necessarily like I'll do me and I'll get out of here and I'll get paid by someone else. So that need to create that you know, harmony, I think is pronounced.
Yeah, it's great, and I think when you brought up Nola, I think he's going to get the contract. He's going to get it before the end of spring training, in my mind. I don't think it's going to linger. I think it's going to happen pretty quickly, as a matter of fact, and that's a great thing. And you know, I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying to line it up for once the World Baseball Classic kind of starts. Because he's not going, he's still going to be there. So it's something that they can kind of trumpet while so many other players are not around, right? So I kind of think that that's when it could happen. But it's going to happen, and that's what makes this. There's a great, and I put a little post up on Crossing Broad today. I'll finish with this. There's a little interview that Jason Stark and Doug Glanville did on their podcast. I think they did the interview yesterday, but it came out today with Kyle Schwarber. And they had originally scheduled him to be on the podcast. And Schwarber apparently got like the schedule confused and scheduled a round of golf with some of the other Phillies, but still agreed to do this long form 45-minute interview with Stark and Glanville. And it's a great interview. And you go to Crossing Broad and you go to my story, you'll be able to see it, be able to watch the whole 45 minutes. It's a great interview. It's a lot of fun. And he's out on the golf course with JT, with Bryson Stott, and I think it was Garrett Stubbs was the 4th guy. And they are just having a blast with this whole thing. And they talk a lot about that culture. And you know how Schwarber is, right? I mean, he notices everything. He's very analytical. He's able to really kind of harness what that is in that clubhouse. And you get the sense just from watching that video, they are ready to come back and play. They're not, like you were saying earlier, this isn't a team that's going to get complacent. And it's because they like each other so much.
Yeah.
It's a great clubhouse in that vein, and you have to have that if you're going to be competitive. Even if you have 2 other teams in the division like Atlanta and New York, who you think may be a little bit better and probably will win a few more games, well, then that's what's going to carry you through, and that's what the Phillies have set up. They've created that culture. They've had it for a long time, and then it kind of went away a little bit, but now they're bringing it back, and I think that this is all tied to Dombrowski and his people and getting the right people in that locker room. I think they're gonna really be a fun team. I'm not certain I will pick them to win the division either, but I think that they're going to be a fun team this year, and it's going to be a real exciting thing to watch. And damn, Brewers, you should learn from this. You should learn from this because you're going to lose Corbin Burns, and Aaron Nola is going to be with the Phillies for 6-7 more years easy.
Yep. Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, that will do it for our first episode. We will be back on Monday with our next show. Make sure that you're following us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter, both of our personal accounts here. I'm Bob Wankel at Bob Wankel CB, Anthony Sanfilippo at AntSanPhilly. And then you can follow the show brand new Twitter account. Not many followers right now. I think Anthony and I are the only two that are following. So, throw us a pity follow on Twitter there. That's up at Up Phillies. And we will talk to you guys next week.